From behind the camera to the front lines of history, we document the truly extraordinary. Prepare to immerse yourself in the definitive moments and visual records that permanently altered our global landscape.
Why are you shaking? What are you nervous about?
I'm just scared. I've never
You're
been
shaking
pulled
like
over
you're transporting
before.
something. You got drugs in this vehicle?
What? No, I don't have drugs. I'm
You
just
expect
scared.
me to believe a kid like you is driving a car like this and it just happens to belong to your
Yes,
father?
that's my dad. Please just
You're
call
either
him.
a dealer driving your boss's car or you stole it. Which one is it?
Sir, I have asthma. I need to
What
stay
did you
calm.
take? You're tweaking.
On May 22, 2025, Atlanta police officer Brett Dunham saw a black teenager driving through an upscale neighborhood in a luxury car, assumed he was witnessing a crime in progress, and pulled him over with his mind already made up about who this kid was and what he'd done. He accused the shaking, terrified 17-year-old of being a drug dealer, refused to believe the car belonged to the boy's father, and when the teenager's fear triggered an asthma attack, Dunham dismissed it as a drug reaction and kept his knee pressed into the kid's neck while witnesses screamed that he was killing him. What Dunham didn't know was that the boy gasping for air beneath him was the son of being a drug dealer, refused to believe the car belonged to the boy's father, and when the teenager's fear triggered an asthma attack, Dunham dismissed it as a drug reaction and kept his knee pressed into the kid's neck while witnesses screamed that he was killing him. What Dunham didn't know was that the boy gasping for air beneath him was the son of being a drug dealer, refused to believe the car belonged to the boy's father, and when the teenager's fear triggered an asthma attack, Dunham dismissed it as a drug reaction and kept his knee pressed into the kid's neck while witnesses screamed that he was killing him. What Dunham didn't know was that the boy gasping for air beneath him was the son of a prominent attorney who would use every resource at his disposal to ensure this officer faced the full consequences of his actions, that the entire incident was being recorded from multiple angles, and that his refusal to provide medical assistance to a dying child would result in criminal charges and a prison sentence, of a prominent attorney who would use every resource at his disposal to ensure this officer faced the full consequences of his actions, that the entire incident was being recorded from multiple angles, and that his refusal to provide medical assistance to a dying child would result in criminal charges and a prison sentence, of a prominent attorney who would use every resource at his disposal to ensure this officer faced the full consequences of his actions, that the entire incident was being recorded from multiple angles, and that his refusal to provide medical assistance to a dying child would result in criminal charges and a prison sentence, of being a drug dealer, refused to believe the car belonged to the boy's father, and when the teenager's fear triggered an asthma attack, Dunham dismissed it as a drug reaction and kept his knee pressed into the kid's neck while witnesses screamed that he was killing him. What Dunham didn't know was that the boy gasping for air beneath him was the son of a prominent attorney who would use every resource at his disposal to ensure this officer faced the full consequences of his actions, that the entire incident was being recorded from multiple angles, and that his refusal to provide medical assistance to a dying child would result in criminal charges and a prison sentence. This story is going to make your blood boil. Hit that like button and subscribe to JPTV because you need to see where this goes. Druid Hills is one of Atlanta's most established and affluent neighborhoods, where tree-lined streets wind past historic homes worth well over $1 million, and the kind of quiet, manicured lawns that suggest old money and careful maintenance. The area sits just northeast of downtown Atlanta, close enough to Emory University that professors and doctors from the hospital live there, far enough from the city center that it feels removed from urban noise. Ponce de Leon Avenue cuts straight through the neighborhood, a main thoroughfare that connects the area to the rest of the city. Isaiah was 17 years old, a junior at Maynard Jackson High School, where he maintained a 3.7 GPA and played point guard on the varsity basketball team. He lived with his parents in a beautiful craftsman-style home on Lowwater Road, about a mile from where everything would go wrong. His father, Marcus, was a civil rights attorney with his own firm downtown, someone who'd built a reputation over 20 years representing families in police brutality cases and winning settlements that made the city pay attention. His mother was a pediatrician at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. They'd worked hard to give Isaiah and his younger sister everything they needed, including the values to make good decisions. On this particular Thursday afternoon, Isaiah made a bad decision. His father had taken an Uber to work that morning because his BMW 5 Series was getting detailed later that day, which meant the car was sitting in their driveway, keys hanging on the hook by the garage door. Isaiah's friend had texted him about picking up the new video game they'd both been waiting for, and the GameStop on Ponce de Leon had it in stock. Isaiah knew his parents' rule. He couldn't drive without permission, even though he had his license. But his dad was in court all day, his mom was at the hospital, and the car was just sitting there. He grabbed the keys at 3:47 p.m. and backed the BMW out of the driveway, telling himself he'd be back in 20 minutes and nobody would even know. The car was a black 540i, sleek and expensive, the kind his father had bought as a reward to himself after winning a particularly large settlement. Isaiah drove carefully, staying exactly at the speed limit, using his turn signals, doing everything by the book because he knew if he got pulled over, his father would kill him for taking the car without asking. He made it to the GameStop, bought the game, and was heading back home when he noticed the patrol car behind him on Ponce de Leon Avenue, near the intersection with Briarcliff Road. The officer didn't have his lights on yet, was just following about 2 car lengths back. Isaiah's heart started beating faster. He checked his speed, 28 in a 35 zone. He looked at his turn signals, his lane position. Everything was correct, but the patrol car stayed behind him, and Isaiah could feel the officer's attention on him like a weight. Then the lights came on. Isaiah's stomach dropped. He put on his signal, slowed down, and pulled into the parking lot of a small shopping center. His hands were shaking as he shifted into park. He'd had the talk with his parents multiple times about what to do if he got pulled over. Hands on the wheel, be polite, don't argue, do exactly what they say. He took a breath and tried to calm down, but his heart was racing and his hands wouldn't stop trembling. The officer who approached his window was white, maybe late 30s, with a buzz cut and the kind of walk that said he was used to being in charge. His name tag read Dunham. He stood at Isaiah's window for a long moment before Isaiah realized he needed to roll it down. "License and registration," Dunham said. No greeting, no explanation for the stop. "Yes, sir," Isaiah said, his voice coming out shakier than he wanted. "Can I ask why you pulled me over?" "License and registration," Dunham repeated, his tone harder. Isaiah reached slowly for the glove compartment, keeping his movements visible. "I'm reaching for the registration. It's in here." His hands were shaking so badly he could barely open the compartment. He found the registration in his wallet with his license and handed them through the window. Dunham took them and studied the documents. His eyes moved from the registration to Isaiah's face, then back to the registration. "This car is registered to Marcus Harper." "Yes, sir, that's my dad," Isaiah said quickly. "This is his car. I took it without asking, and I know I shouldn't have, but it's not stolen or anything. It's my dad's." Dunham's expression didn't change. "You're shaking. Why are you shaking?" "I'm nervous," Isaiah said honestly. "I've never been pulled over before." "You're shaking like you're transporting something you shouldn't have," Dunham said, his eyes scanning the interior of the car. "You got drugs in this vehicle?" Isaiah's eyes went wide. "What? No, I don't have drugs. I'm just scared." "Step out of the car," Dunham ordered. "Sir, I didn't do anything wrong," Isaiah said, his voice rising slightly with panic. "I was going the speed limit. I had my seatbelt on. I said step out of the car. Now." Isaiah opened the door with shaking hands and got out. He was tall for 17, maybe 6'1", but he looked young, baby-faced, wearing a Maynard Jackson basketball hoodie and jeans. Dunham positioned him with his hands on the hood of the BMW. "What are you nervous about?" Dunham asked, standing close behind him. "You transporting drugs? That why your hands are shaking like that?" "I'm not on drugs. I don't have drugs," Isaiah said, his breathing getting faster. "I'm just scared because I took my dad's car without permission, and I thought I was going to get in trouble." "You expect me to believe that a kid like you is driving a car like this, and it just happens to belong to your father?" Dunham's voice was heavy with skepticism. "You're either a dealer driving your boss's car, or you stole it. Which one is it?" "Neither," Isaiah said desperately. "It's my dad's car. You can call him. Please just call him. His number is in my phone." "I think you're lying to me," Dunham said. "I think you're a drug dealer, and you're scared because you know I'm about to find what you're hiding." Isaiah's breathing was coming faster now, his chest feeling tight. He tried to take a deep breath but couldn't get enough air. "Sir, I have asthma. I need to stay calm. My inhaler is in the car." Dunham saw the hyperventilating, and his suspicion intensified. "What did you take? You're tweaking right now. What drugs are in your system?" "I didn't take anything," Isaiah gasped. "I have asthma. I need my inhaler." But Dunham wasn't listening. He grabbed Isaiah's arm to turn him around for a pat-down, and Isaiah stumbled slightly from the sudden movement and the fact that he was struggling to breathe. Dunham interpreted the stumble as resistance. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Dunham grabbed Isaiah by the back of his hoodie, spun him violently away from the car, and drove him face first into the asphalt of the parking lot. Isaiah's head hit the pavement hard enough that he saw stars. Before he could process what was happening, Dunham had a knee pressed into the back of his neck, the officer's full weight pinning him down. Isaiah couldn't breathe. The impact had knocked the air out of his lungs. The pressure on his neck was cutting off his airway, and the panic and trauma were triggering a full asthma attack. His chest was seizing, his throat closing, every attempt to inhale producing nothing but a desperate wheeze. A woman named Veronica was walking to her car in the parking lot and saw the whole thing. She ran toward them, her phone already out and recording. "Get off him! He's just a kid! He's not fighting you!" "Suspect is resisting," Dunham shouted back, struggling to get Isaiah's arms behind his back for handcuffs. Isaiah wasn't resisting. He was dying, his body going limp from lack of oxygen. But Dunham didn't see the difference. "He can't breathe," Veronica screamed. "Look at him! He needs help!" "He's high on something," Dunham said, finally getting the handcuffs on. "Whatever he took is making him act like this." Isaiah's lips were turning blue. His vision was going dark. His last conscious thought was that he was going to die in a parking lot over a video game. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. If you believe that being a scared teenager should never be a death sentence, then hit that like and subscribe button and join the JPTV family. Veronica was still recording when Dunham finally took his knee off Isaiah's neck. The teenager wasn't moving. His body was completely limp, his face pressed against the asphalt, his hands cuffed behind his back. Veronica dropped her phone and ran closer. "He's not breathing," she yelled. "Call 911. This kid is dying." Dunham stood up and looked down at Isaiah with an expression that showed no concern. "He's faking. Stop being dramatic. He took something, and now he's trying to get sympathy." "He told you he has asthma," Veronica shouted, kneeling beside Isaiah. She could see his chest wasn't moving right, could hear the terrible wheezing sound coming from his throat. "He needs his inhaler. He said it's in the car." Other people in the parking lot had noticed the commotion and were coming over. A man pulled out his phone and started recording from a different angle. Another woman was already on the phone with 911, reporting that a teenager was having a medical emergency. Dunham radioed for backup. "This is Unit 23. I've got a suspect in custody at the shopping center on Ponce de Leon near Briarcliff. Possible drug overdose. Need medical on scene." "It's not a drug overdose," Veronica screamed at him. "It's asthma. Why won't you listen?" Dunham ignored her and walked to the BMW, looking through the windows like he was searching for evidence. Isaiah's phone was on the passenger seat, the GameStop bag in the back. Nothing that indicated drugs or criminal activity, just a teenager's normal stuff. Isaiah was still on the ground, his breathing getting worse instead of better. His chest was heaving, but barely any air was getting through. His face had gone from blue-tinged to a darker, more dangerous color. Veronica didn't know what to do except keep talking to him, telling him help was coming, begging him to hold on. An ambulance arrived 4 minutes later, which felt like an eternity. The paramedics rushed over with their equipment, and one of them, a woman named Angela, took one look at Isaiah and immediately understood the severity. "How long has he been like this?" Angela demanded, pulling out a stethoscope and an oxygen mask. "Maybe 5 minutes," Veronica said. "He told the cop he has asthma and needed his inhaler, but the cop didn't listen." Angela's partner was already cutting through Isaiah's hoodie to get better access to his chest. They got the oxygen mask on his face and Angela listened to his lungs. What she heard made her face go tight with concern. "This is severe bronchospasm," Angela said to her partner. "Get me the albuterol now. We need to intubate if this doesn't work fast." "Where's his inhaler?" her partner asked. "He said it was in the car," Veronica said, pointing at the BMW. Angela ran to the car and found the inhaler in the center console. She came back and administered it, but Isaiah was so far into the attack that it wasn't enough. His oxygen saturation was dangerously low. His body wasn't responding the way it should. "We need to transport immediately," Angela said. "This kid is critical." Dunham was standing nearby watching all of this with his arms crossed. "Is he going to be all right?" Angela looked at him with pure disgust. "He might die. He's in severe respiratory distress and has been for several minutes without proper treatment." "Did he tell you he had asthma?" "He said something about it," Dunham said defensively, "but he was also acting like he was high on something. I thought he was lying." "He wasn't lying," Angela said coldly. "He was dying, and you stood there and let it happen." They got Isaiah onto a stretcher and into the ambulance. Angela's partner was already starting an IV line, preparing medications, doing everything they could to keep this teenager alive long enough to get him to a hospital. Veronica gave Angela her contact information and sent her the video she'd recorded, knowing it might be important later. The ambulance pulled away with lights and sirens, racing toward Emory University Hospital 2 miles away. Dunham stood in the parking lot with a small crowd of witnesses, all of whom had recorded at least part of what happened, all of whom were looking at him like he'd just committed a crime. He was writing up his incident report in his patrol car when his radio crackled. It was his sergeant asking for his location and telling him to stay on scene. Something in the sergeant's voice told Dunham this wasn't routine. 10 minutes later, a silver Audi pulled into the parking lot, and a black man in an expensive suit got out. He was in his mid-40s, well-built, moving with purpose and barely controlled rage. He walked straight to Veronica, who was still there waiting to give a statement. "Are you the one who called me?" he asked, his voice tight. "Are you Isaiah's father?" Veronica asked. "Yes, Marcus Harper. Where's my son?" "They took him to Emory," Veronica said. "It's bad. He couldn't breathe, and the officer wouldn't help him." Marcus turned and looked at Dunham, who was still sitting in his patrol car. Their eyes met through the windshield, and Dunham saw something in that man's face that made him understand his life was about to change in ways he couldn't control. Marcus didn't say a word to him. He just got back in his car and drove toward the hospital, leaving Dunham sitting there knowing that whatever came next was going to be worse than anything he'd faced before. Marcus Harper arrived at Emory University Hospital and ran through the emergency entrance doors. He found Isaiah in a trauma base surrounded by doctors and nurses working frantically to save his life. His son was intubated, a breathing tube down his throat connected to a ventilator forcing air into his lungs. Monitors beeped urgently, showing oxygen levels that were still critically low, despite the machine breathing for him. A doctor in scrubs turned and saw Marcus. "Are you family?" "I'm his father," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "Is he going to live?" The doctor's face was grim. He had a severe asthma attack that went untreated for too long. His brain was deprived of oxygen for approximately 7 to 8 minutes. "We're doing everything we can, but the next few hours are critical." Marcus looked at his son lying there unconscious, a tube in his throat, his face swollen from being slammed into the pavement. He saw the abrasions on Isaiah's forehead and cheek, where his face had hit the asphalt. He saw the marks on his wrist from the handcuffs. "What happened to him?" the doctor asked quietly. "A police officer put a knee on the back of his neck while he was having an asthma attack," Marcus said, his voice like ice, "and refused to give him medical help." The doctor's expression changed to shock, then anger. "Someone did this deliberately?" "I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what happened," Marcus said. His phone had been ringing constantly. He stepped out of the trauma bay and saw messages from Veronica, the witness who'd called him from Isaiah's phone. She'd sent him 3 videos. The first was hers, showing Dunham slamming Isaiah to the ground and putting a knee on his neck while Isaiah struggled to breathe. The second was from another witness, showing Dunham standing over Isaiah's limp body and calling it fake. The third was from someone who'd started recording earlier, catching Dunham accusing Isaiah of being a drug dealer. Marcus watched all 3 videos twice. His hands were shaking with rage by the time he finished. He made a phone call to his law partner. "Janet, I need you to file an emergency civil rights lawsuit tonight. My son was nearly killed by an Atlanta police officer. I'm sending you the videos and witness information right now. I want charges filed before sunrise." His next call was to the police department's internal affairs division, then to the mayor's office, then to 3 different news stations, then to the ACLU, then to every civil rights organization in Georgia that he'd worked with over his 20-year career. By the time the sun set, the videos were everywhere. Local news had picked them up. Social media was exploding. People were watching a 17-year-old kid get slammed into the ground, watching him gasp for air while a cop knelt on his neck, watching him turn blue while the officer dismissed it as drug use. Dunham was called into his supervisor's office at 6 p.m. His sergeant sat across from him with a laptop showing the videos that had gone viral. "Tell me this isn't you," the sergeant said. Dunham watched the video and his face went pale. He was resisting. He was acting like he was high on something. "He was having an asthma attack," the sergeant said flatly, "and you kept your knee on his neck while he was dying. There's a witness who says he told you he needed his inhaler, and you called him a liar." "I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't listen," the sergeant interrupted. "You decided that kid was a drug dealer the second you saw him, and you almost killed him because of it." The sergeant's phone rang. He answered it, listened for a moment, and his face went even more serious. "Understood." He hung up and looked at Dunham. "That was the chief. Do you know who that kid's father is?" Dunham shook his head. "Marcus Harper, the civil rights attorney. He's won more police brutality cases in this city than anyone else in the past decade. He's represented families against this department 7 times and won every single case. And you just gave him the most clear-cut case of excessive force and medical neglect he's ever had." Dunham felt his stomach drop. "There's more," the sergeant continued. "The kid is on a ventilator. The doctors say if he'd gone another 2 minutes without oxygen, he would have had permanent brain damage or died. You came that close to killing a 17-year-old over a traffic stop." The sergeant slid a folder across the desk. "You're suspended without pay effective immediately. Internal Affairs will be investigating. And I'd suggest you get a lawyer, because the city attorney just told me they're not going to defend you on this one. You're on your own." Dunham sat there in complete silence as the weight of what he'd done crashed down on him. The video was everywhere. The kid was fighting for his life, and the father was someone who knew exactly how to destroy him. His career was over. But that was just the beginning. Isaiah Harper woke up 3 days later in the ICU at Emory University Hospital. The breathing tube had been removed the day before, but his throat was raw and his chest ached. His father was sitting in a chair beside the bed, and when Isaiah opened his eyes, Marcus broke down and cried for the first time since the whole ordeal started. "I thought I lost you," Marcus said, holding his son's hand. "The doctors said you were minutes away from brain damage or death." Isaiah's voice came out as a whisper. "I'm sorry I took the car." Marcus shook his head. "We'll talk about that later. Right now, I just need you to focus on getting better." But while Isaiah was recovering, Marcus was making sure Brett Dunham's life was being systematically destroyed. The lawsuit was filed on day 2 while Isaiah was still on the ventilator. Marcus didn't handle it himself because he was too emotionally involved, but he brought in Janet Morrison, his law partner, and 2 other attorneys from the firm who specialized in civil rights cases. The suit sought $18 million in damages and named Dunham personally, the Atlanta Police Department, and the City of Atlanta for failure to properly train and discipline officers with patterns of excessive force. Because the department's own investigation revealed that Dunham had 7 prior excessive force complaints over 11 years, 6 of them involving young black men, and none of them had resulted in serious discipline. The city had settled 3 of those complaints quietly, paying out money to make them go away without ever addressing the officer who kept generating them. The video evidence made the case impossible to defend. 3 different angles showing Dunham slamming a teenager to the ground, kneeling on his neck, ignoring his pleas for help, dismissing his medical emergency as drug use, and standing over his limp body, claiming he was faking. The witnesses all told the same story. The paramedics documented that Isaiah had been in severe respiratory distress for several minutes without intervention. The Fulton County District Attorney reviewed the case and filed criminal charges against Dunham within 2 weeks. Aggravated assault, reckless endangerment of a minor, official misconduct, and deprivation of rights under color of law. The charges carried a potential sentence of 15 years in prison. Dunham hired David Strickland, one of the best defense attorneys in Georgia, but even Strickland told him the case was nearly impossible to win. The evidence was overwhelming. The video had been seen by millions of people. The victim was a 17-year-old honor student with no criminal record who'd nearly died from an asthma attack while a cop knelt on his neck. The trial took place 9 months later and lasted 8 days. The prosecution showed the videos. Isaiah testified about thinking he was going to die, about begging for his inhaler, about the officer calling him a drug dealer, and refusing to believe anything he said. The doctors testified about how close he'd come to permanent brain damage. Veronica and the other witnesses described watching Dunham ignore a medical emergency. The defense tried to argue Dunham had feared for his safety and made decisions in the heat of the moment. The prosecution destroyed that argument by showing that Dunham had kept his knee on Isaiah's neck for over a minute after the teenager had stopped moving, that multiple witnesses had told him the kid couldn't breathe, and that he'd had plenty of time to reassess and chose not to. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Dunham guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The civil lawsuit went to trial separately 6 months later. The jury awarded the Harper family $16 million. Dunham was personally liable for $2 million, which he would never be able to pay. The city of Atlanta was liable for the rest. But Marcus Harper didn't keep the money for his family. He established the Isaiah Harper Foundation, dedicated to helping families who'd experienced police violence, but didn't have the resources to fight it back the way he could. The foundation provided legal assistance, connected families with attorneys, and advocated for policy changes. The Atlanta Police Department underwent massive reforms. Mandatory medical training for all officers, especially regarding asthma and breathing emergencies. Strict new policies on use of force against minors. Body cameras that couldn't be turned off. A civilian oversight board with real power to investigate and discipline. And a new policy named after Isaiah that required officers to immediately provide medical assistance when someone reported difficulty breathing. Brett Dunham sat in a federal prison in Georgia serving his 12-year sentence. He lost his pension, his career, his freedom, and his reputation. He became a case study in police academies across the country about what happens when racial profiling and excessive force meet medical neglect. Isaiah graduated from high school on time, despite missing weeks of school recovering from his injuries. He had PTSD from the incident and panic attacks whenever he saw police. He went to therapy twice a week. He couldn't drive without his hands shaking. The asthma attack had been so severe that his lung function never fully recovered. But he was alive, which the doctors had said was close to a miracle given how long he'd gone without proper oxygen. And he watched his father turn the worst experience of his life into something that might prevent it from happening to someone else's child. Marcus kept a photo on his desk of Isaiah in his hospital bed, intubated and fighting for his life. Not because he wanted to remember the trauma, but because it reminded him why his work mattered, why accountability mattered, why one case, one conviction, one reform could be the difference between a family burying their child and a family getting them back. If this story showed you why police must be held accountable when they nearly kill children, share it with everyone you know. Every view, every share, every subscription to JPTV helps us expose injustice and demand change. Hit that subscribe button because we're not stopping until every story like Isaiah's leads to real consequences and real reform. The end.
In a fast-paced world full of endless information, every authentic record forms a crucial narrative. Our primary mission is to dissect these narratives to reveal the undeniable truth. Thank you for trusting us and actively joining this analytical journey.